computer. Welcome to Artist Trauma. This week we did Dubliners, some selections from Dubliners. Uh, Painful Case,
Or as
Araby.
you've been corrected by the Irish guy, Dubliners.
Yeah, Dubliners. I, did they do Dubliners again? Oh god,
Yeah, you're good.
that's disgusting. Yeah, Dubliners. Um, and Painful Case, Little Cloud, Boarding House, and Araby. So let's get into it. Let's start with the first one in that selection, which was Araby. What did you
Yeah.
think, Chris? Oh, by the way, just so everyone knows, it's a boy who has a crush on a girl across the street who seems older than him. She tells him to go to an Araby, and he's just sort of disappointed. So
Well,
it's
he gets
that's
there
what.
late.
Yeah, he gets there late, and that's basically it. It's a lot of Joyce's stories are just sort of like disappointment. They're set up for something exciting, and then it just breaks down. So, what feelings does this provoke in you, Chris?
So for this one, and then for I think it was a Little Cloud. Is a Little Cloud the one where he met the high school friend or the earlier friend for
Yes,
me?
yes,
Yeah.
that was the one.
These two, um, I actually was able to resonate with my own life. Oh, I've had these experiences. So I was like, and so I thought they were very well described because they're very relatable stories. Actually, that was something that's kind of funny is I thought all four of these stories were just relatable. I mean, there's not a lot of artifice in terms of uh experience, and in fact what was great about them, and including Araby, is two things. um just mental description, very simply, how the mind, there's often a lot of splits in the mind and contradictions, and he's able to write those out in a very wonderful way, I found.
Mhm.
And in this one, I just thought the sense at the end of, it's like at the end of the night, feeling when there's no more parties left to be had that night. It's time, you still have energy, and yet it's over. There's nothing else left. There's nothing to spend the energy on. It's
Yeah,
kind of a desolation feeling, maybe, I really
yeah,
enjoyed about it.
yeah. It's very desolate because it is just this. Well, it's just a sort of like hopeless affection from a distance, basically. Like basically the most he has ever talked to her is a few chance conversations briefly, and his largest interaction with her is waiting for her to come out at a certain time and then walking up behind her and then passing her. Um,
Yeah.
which is
I
kind
forgot
of
about that.
adorable and heart
Mhm.
crushing. It's like, oh, that's the extent of your relationship there. I just like one thing about Joyce in general from my reading is his sense of life is basically a sensitive, thoughtful person being surrounded by crushing vulgarity. That's like a big part of it. And like there's one bit that sort of like feels relevant. Like he's talking about his feelings for her. Um, Her image accompanied me even in places the most hostile to romance. On Saturday evenings when my aunt went marketing, I had to carry some of the parcels. We walked through the flaring streets, jostled by drunken men and bargaining women, amid the curses of laborers, the shrill litanies of shop boys who stood on guard by the barrels of pig cheeks, the nasal chanting of street singers who sang "Come All You" about O'Donovan Rosa, or a ballad about the troubles of our native land. These noises converged in a single sensation of life for me. I imagined that I bore my chalice safely through a throng of foes. Her name sprang to my lips at moments in strange prayers and praises which I myself did not understand. Yeah, it's like that's a nice image of just like, yeah, like humdrum vulgarity, tedium, all around him. Now here, in this moment, he's still feeling good about things. He's still
Well,
feeling,
yeah.
like, oh, he's got this still sensitive thing inside of him for now.
Well, yeah,
But
it's sort of love is an armor against the non-erotic aspects of the world. It's my eroticism is so strong I can even bring those in. It's fine.
yeah,
At
yeah,
that moment. Not later, but at that moment, yes.
yeah. And just actually just a little description of what she's like to him. Like there's this moment when he's talking with her, And actually, when she's asking him to go to the Araby to go buy her something, it just says, the light from the lamp opposite our door caught the white curve of her neck, lit her up her hair that rested there, falling, lit up by the hand upon the railing. It fell over one side of her dress and caught the white border of a petticoat, just visible as she stood at ease. Yeah, I like that. I like that. It's like
Yeah,
that,
it's good.
that sort of almost like, I don't want to say dreamlike, but just almost just that sort of sensitive lighting and curvature to her that you get. It feels like that image of that a secret admirer would have of the object of their affection.
Yeah, and that's another thing that he's really good at, Joyce, is it's not enough to just like describe a character. You have to literally infect the whole story with the life of like the sense of life of Joyce is one thing, but what I think Joyce is great at is letting the character's sense of life dictate how things go. And it's like he's very, how do I put it?
Yeah,
He's like a really empathetic writer to his own character. He's very good at letting the characters move and not holding them back with some agenda or something.
yeah. Like that's a good. I never quite thought of it in that way. Of the writer has his own attitude towards things, and these
Yeah.
characters that sort of represent, at least, are very relevant to him. Especially, when it's one of these third person, basically first person, or third person, but closely centered on one character sort of stories.
Yeah, they're like tokens of the overall architecture of the being of the writer in a sense. But they're
Yeah, but
also
it's that flavor of like the
yeah,
right attitude. It's like this dimension, compared to this and the painful case we'll get to later. It's like there's a very different flavor, although it's certainly from the same, cut from the same
right.
cloth. To an
Right.
extent.
Whereas like the two writers I would contrast with are the William Gass and the Balzac, where both of them, when I just read this, I'm just like Balzac, Balzac, Balzac.
Yes,
There's
yes,
variations in Balzac, but like who cares? It's Balzac.
yeah,
Whereas in this one, it really, really matters that the specific, not just characteristics and individuality, but as you said about the author, sense of life of each character. And I think that maybe makes him better. I don't know. In
yeah,
a
yeah.
sense.
I mean, I guess you can argue it depends on what you're doing,
Yeah.
but like, yeah, I think it is a genuine. I mean, like, what's one complaint you get about certain writers like Hugo or O. Henry
Hmm.
is all their characters talk very well and the same. They're all talking in Hugoese or the
Yeah. Well, and
and,
again, we've already read two like that. Gas was kind of like that, and Balzac was
yeah, yeah,
better than Gas in a lot of ways, but like is exactly like that too. Gas, but they're both sort of you're on this ride of their ship of their subjectivity, and it's not that Joyce's subjectivity is not relevant to these plays or these pieces. Of course, it is. It's just that it's nice to actually get characters, and this is where I think Joyce is much more similar to Chekhov
yeah,
than
yeah,
these other writers we've been doing.
yeah. I think you're right about that. There's just another bit of it here was just just like on the day before, yeah, the day he's supposed to go on to the Araby, he's reminding his father in the morning that he's going to go and he needs money from the father to get going.
Yeah,
He just reminds him. He says, and the father says, "Yes, boy, I know." And and as he was in the hall, I could not go into the front parlor and lie at the window, to see her, the girl. I felt
yeah,
the house in bad humor and walked slowly towards the school. The air was pitilessly raw, and already my heart misgave me. I just love that the air was pitilessly raw. Like I feel in my lungs, like what,
feel it. Yeah,
and it's like I know, and just that feeling of like things are not going to turn out well here. Like you already have that immense feeling, and of course, the father comes home drunk, and I just love this the way it's conveyed. This is already like
yeah,
way past when he should be home. The father. It says like at
right.
9 o'clock, I heard my uncle's. This is actually the uncle, not the father.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Same.
Uncle's latchkey in the hall door. I heard him talking to himself, and heard the hall stand rocking when it had received the weight of his overcoat. I could interpret these signs. It's just like, yeah, that's a great. It's like, yeah, he's drunk. You can hear that, like talking to himself, and the whole time rocking when he received the weight of his overcoat.
Yeah.
Like, that sloppiness, that
Yeah.
inebriation. It's great. It's great.
I think there's really two ways you could think of the tone quality of this story. The one is like generally serious, kind of like the normal reading you would have of like this kid, and that burning sense of desire really comes through, and that futility of that sense of desire. I mean, oh my gosh, how many times in high school did I have it where it's like, would you like to call her later and chat? I don't know. I might be busy, but I might give you a call. Oh, and then your heart, you're like, oh, you're just like, yeah, we all know this, right? It's a very common young man, and I'm sure a young woman thing, but like, the other way to read some of these portions, not the whole, is with the tone of a Christmas story. And this scene is like the narrator of a Christmas story shining through in kind of that humor, slightly more humorous, distanced way. When I get away from the experience of it and I think of like a person older looking back, as in a Christmas story, where it's just kind of a funny scene. So I think that one you can have a little more distance to, and it makes it less traumatic, but also a little humorous. He doesn't even know the girl,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah, it's a little bit. I mean, there is an edge of humor to it. Um,
Mm.
that's like, it is just a trifle. I feel that's partly derivative from from maybe Joyce's sense that, yeah, like these attempts at values you're gonna have are, like life isn't that kind of place, honey. I'm sorry, but it's like life is not the kind of place where you get what you want. So it is a tad funny in that context, and I could see someone actually reading these stories as a little humorous because of that intense incongruity.
Well, this one.
This one, I
Well,
know.
some of
Well,
the other ones I have like I think are actually deeply tragic for
yeah,
me.
they
For me,
are
my
deeply
reading.
tragic. They are
Yeah.
deeply tragic, but it's even there. Like I was actually applying that to later stories, and I feel like just a little bit. Like you could read as just a touch of like of absurdity to it. But anyway, um,
Yeah, let's table that as we move to as we go.
yeah. But
Um,
I just got to mention one other thing here. Like when he's like finally gets the Araby, and it's already too late, and it's like he's listening to this girl talking to some guys at the little store. And it's just you overhear this bit of dialogue in the conversation between the girl and them. It's like, oh, I never said such a thing. Oh, but you did. Oh, but I didn't. Didn't she say that? Yes, I heard her. Oh, there's a fit. Like just that little glimmer of like
yeah.
just almost like airheaded scandal, um, of like empty flirtation, there, and it just has that great tonal quality of being vulgar in that conventional way. Like it's great, and it's just,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like he's looking up, and like it's just at the very end, he's just looking up at the gallery, the upper floor, and someone yells out that it's going to, close down or whatever. I heard a voice call from one end of the gallery that the light was out. The upper part of the hall was now completely dark. Gazing up into the darkness, I saw myself as a creature driven and derided by vanity, and my eyes burned with anguish and fury. Like that's great. That's great. That's great. You're just disappointed. You can't, like life just did this to you. Got your hopes up, and now it's too late.
Yeah. And then this is where, my personal relating to the story leaves, because as a kid there would have been nothing as cool as being in a bazaar after dark sneaking around. But I thought that was perfect. I'm glad you read that, because I was actually about to ask you, like, yeah, you got to read the ending of this story, because I think that there's a theme in Joyce. Correct me if I'm wrong, I've only read 4 stories, but and this might be more of the modernist shift, but there's a sense of like ending alone. So this one ends alone, a painful case ends alone. Um, and there's always this loneliness loneliness seems to be there in all the stories. Like in this one, he ends alone.
Yeah, yeah. There's a sense of loneliness, even even a little cloud where technically there's two other people in the room. Who it's
Yeah. Whereas like in Chekhov, there's obviously implied loneliness. It's not like 19th century people didn't feel alone, but like it just doesn't seem as forefronted in Chekhov or in Balzac. Whereas so much of these,
Well, I don't want to put this exactly as a modernist quality. It's more just
yeah,
I just want to say it's more of a Joycean quality. Is
gotcha.
it's he just feels intensely lonely. Um,
Yeah, he
like
does,
there
doesn't
is,
he?
and I do feel like a Portrait of the Artist is a Young Man. His novel, his first novel. There are just moments in that book that made me feel vulnerable like no other work I've ever read. As in, I just felt this sense of just I'm going to be hit like I'm a child. Um,
Wow.
and it's like that's just beautiful. It's like it is uniquely Joyce in a sense. Like there are other books like oh, I mean, I'm trying to think of like the loneliness and modernism. I mean, you have Kafka, but Kafka isn't exactly lonely. He's sort of alienated from himself. Like being lonely would actually be a step up.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like Kafka being lonely would be like, oh, thanks, the voices are finally gone from the world or whatever.
Well, no, it'd be sort of like at least I've got myself now.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, like I'm not caught in these structures. Like him being alone is a win. Like there's moments in the castle when he's alone and there's kind of a breath of like he gets a little breathing air because he's finally left a little bit alone.
no, that's right. The way you're mentioning it there, like yeah, he can't get away from people in a sense. He's entangled with them. I
Mhm.
was thinking of it more in the sense of Um, Kafka is the kind of person who can't even feel alone. Like you'd have to have it's like he doesn't have the capacity to be with another person and relate to them.
Yeah,
Joyce
it's like
would at least like to, you
yeah,
know.
he'd like to. It's like a Kafka would read Lacan with this idea of the big other as always kind of like this eye watching, and he'd be like, I didn't know there were any other people. I thought it was just the big other. Like there's no like it's like there's no imaginary for Lacan or for Kafka. It's literally like just the symbolic, like just like this sort of
Yeah,
imposed structure, and he can't really form a self identity in a lot of these works. That's not
yeah,
really right, but
that's a good way.
something like
Yeah, actually, that's a good way of putting it with Kafka. Of it's he doesn't work in the world of the imaginary where like what's the opinions of other people. He's not he doesn't relate to people in that way at all of like what are they thinking and feeling about me. He's only working with them as like in this purely formal relationship of the symbolic of like what is the structure that I have to work and move within and the taboos and duties
I
that
just
implies.
and which is great, don't get me wrong, but there is often the, when you do read like a more quote unquote normal novel and you're like back to some interpersonal relationships, there can be that breath of fresh air when you
Yeah,
go, oh, hey, I can relate to this guy or I can't relate to this guy, but at least there's a possibility of relating. And the loneliness that you're talking about in Joyce, uh, I'm sure I'll feel it more when we get to A Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, but I definitely felt it in these four works as being very good, as a really, really great quality of these works.
yeah. So let's move on to a boarding house,
Sure.
um, or the boarding house. This is about a this woman, Mrs. Mooney, who has a boarding house. She basically she wants to get her daughter married and has her with the boarders that are around. And basically, the daughter manages to start a relationship with a young man, Mr. Doran. I think that's it. Yeah,
Mr. Doran, yep.
Mr. Doran, and basically entraps him into marriage um, with the daughter. So that's the story. How did this strike you?
So I love Mrs. Mooney as a character. I think it was probably my least favorite, just like I mean, again, all four of these are kind of perfect, but like like it
Yeah.
just it didn't hit me as hard as the other three. But Mrs. Mooney did. I think she was a fantastic character, always kind of fluttering around, trying to figure it out, trying to poke in, and I think she was just captured perfectly.
Yeah, well, I don't really think of her as someone fluttering. She
No,
has
sorry,
this very
lumbering,
lumbering. Yes,
lumbering. Sorry,
that
you're
that
right. I
made
forgot. Yeah,
that works. That
yeah.
works.
Sorry, what am I talking about?
Yeah, she has this quality, this deeply mercenary quality about her. Practical. It's not like inhuman exactly, although it comes off as inhuman. I mean, because just like the way, like, okay, she manages.
Yeah,
Yeah, the
yeah.
thing
Give a good, find a good one.
yeah, yeah. Well, let's see. Well, let me just sort of summarize it partly
Yeah,
though. Is the way like she wants to get her daughter married. That's part of why she sort of has her floating around the borders. And she notices at one point there's something going on between her daughter Polly and Mr. Doran, and she goes to talk to her about it. And yeah, basically this is what it says is things were as she had suspected. She had been frank in her questions and Polly frank in her answers. Both had been somewhat awkward, of course. She had been made awkward by her not wishing to receive the news in too cavalier fashion or to seem to have connived, and Polly had been made awkward not merely because allusions of that kind always made her awkward, but also because she did not wish it to be thought that in her wise innocence she divined the intention behind her mother's tolerance.
just
That's perfect. It's so
it's just
dishonest.
perfect. Whenever someone goes, well, when you say the word dialectical maneuvers, what is it? You just point them to that passage. Like, this is dialectical. It's like, and it's so followable, and it's like candy.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such a perfect line. Like the idea of, it's like, okay, the conventional scene that they want to pretend is happening between them is like I'm concerned about you, my daughter, and your welfare, and I don't want you to be tied up with some man. And the daughter's like, like just giving her like a admission of like, oh God, mom, I did this bad thing. That's the scene they want to have happen, you know. But what's
Yeah,
really going on is the mother's like, "Finally, you hooked one, you hussy," and the
yeah,
daughter's
right.
like, and the daughter is like, yeah, I know that's what she's thinking, and yeah, like that's what we're doing here, but I don't want to pretend I know that. Uh,
Well, and that's why like Polly is like what I think James Joyce does this really great job of like is Polly like sleeping around? It's kind of implied that she's in the know. You know, she's not just this young innocent girl. And yet the tears are sort of like, okay, I have to revert just a little bit to this. There's a Polly's a great character, is all I'm
yeah,
saying. Like
yeah,
very
you'll talk
core
about
of the
that
series.
because that also sends a shiver down your spine almost
Mhm.
towards the end. But we'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah, yeah.
But I also just want to mention one thing about Mrs. Mooney since we're still on her. Um, um, just like when Mrs. Mooney was first starting to discover what was going on, it's just like she said, Polly began to grow a little strange in her manner, and the young man was evidently perturbed. At last, when she, Mrs. Mooney, judged it to be the right moment, Mrs. Mooney intervened. She dealt with moral problems as a cleaver deals with meat. And in this case, she had made up her mind. I just love that. Dealt with moral problems as a cleaver deals with meat. Um,
Yeah. There's also like a
no subtlety. No, nothing like that. Just going for it.
well, I mean, also isn't there sort of like a like obviously Joyce depicts everyone with care and love, genders, races, classes, but there's also an attention to class, right? Like this is a lower class, and there's
Yeah.
certain things that very clearly clue you into that.
Well, one thing about it is like it's a very
Yeah.
good metaphor in part because her first husband or only husband was a butcher's assistant. So like that's a good like bit of background for that.
Yeah.
But God, I feel so fucking bad for Mr. Doran. Um, I mean, it was just like in the mercenary way that Mrs. Mooney thinks about these issues of just saying she was sure she would win regarding to getting Mr. Doran to marry the daughter. Um,
Yeah.
to begin with, she had all the weight of social opinion on her side. She was an outraged mother. She had allowed him to live beneath her roof, assuming that he was a man of honor, and he had simply abused her hospitality.
Yeah.
Which is great. As in, it's
Here,
like,
1 second. I gotta grab a pill. 1 sec. Just keep
yeah,
going. Thank you, Anna. Sorry. Yes, keep going.
yeah. As in, it's just that it's like she's pretending to be an outraged mother when she's put her daughter out there as a lure.
Yeah, yeah.
What she
And like,
wanted to have happen.
well,
Um,
and that's where the lure of the whole thing is sort of it's like the honesty behind the text, right? It's it's
yeah.
it's just there as we
Yeah.
talk.
And it was just it was great, like just like talking about what she'll get reparations, and she's like, other mothers, some mothers would be content to patch such an affair up for a sum of money. She had known cases of it, but she would not do so. For her, only one reparation would make up for the loss of her daughter's honor: marriage.
Yeah.
And this is the line that like really is like just mean, is in the way she's like thinking about Mr. Doran. She felt sure she would win. He was a serious young man, not rakish or loudmouth like the others. If it had been Mr. Sheridan or Mr. Mean or Bantam Lyons, her task would have been much harder. She did not think he would face publicity. As in, again, it's like using the better parts of his nature. He's not one of these loudmouths like Bantam
Yeah.
Lyons. It's like, that's great. That's great.
Yeah. And then, he I don't know, there's some things in Joyce that are really small but just really nice, vivid choices. The choice of working at a Catholic wine merchant's office is very like it gives me images of like really high and really low at the same time.
Well, yeah,
Like it like are really conflicting, or I don't know, how does that title strike you? It's a great
uh,
title.
yeah, God, what is? Yeah, I think you're right. I didn't think about that dimension of a very strongly Catholic wine merchant's place. It's both like all of the sort of steady bourgeois conventional values sort of thing on the one hand, like narrow closed mindedness, that whole stereotype, and then also Catholic, like adding all the prejudices of the Catholic religion on top of it. It's like, yeah, yeah, you don't, what the employer thinks about this kind of a scandal. I'm
Yeah,
sleeping.
I think you could read it that way, or you could read the Catholic one. I completely agree with the wine merchant one. You could think more as like the viewpoint of Mrs. Mooney, doing business. Like I'm in the doing business to get married, doing business to have sex, whatever is that transaction, and then the church aspect is the only morality one that's saying no, don't do that.
Yeah, it's like yeah, I think the merchant is good. Yeah, I think that just the fact that it's merchant adds that sense of that mercenary quality, as I was mentioning. Like,
Yeah, that Mooney has,
that's
right?
as
Like
in, it'd
I'm
be
putting my
different if it's
daughter
like a
out.
government office or something.
Yeah, where if
Um,
it was a government office, it'd be too similar to the church already.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's nice that it's like it has that tone quality there.
Yeah, and this is something also I like about Joyce is that you can kind of look at every single word on this page and it fits. I don't know. You like with Balzac, you would never do that, right? Like because there's certain sentences where it's like, well, that one's just he's just writing. It's like you'd never take in a Balzac work and think that every sentence is mechanically related
Mhm.
because it's just every slave to the grist of motion, sort of. Whereas with Joyce, I do feel this sense like of just an incredibly again aware writer where everything is just very fun to tease out. Even if we wind up finding nothing in a sentence, it's still worthwhile to talk about.
Yeah, like there's God, this is always great things of
Mm.
um I mean, just the fact that he like recollects to himself at one point, he just flat out says he had a notion that he was being had. Like he knows he's being tricked into this. He knows that something happened here. I mean, just even the way like the girl like actually, when he's thinking about like the way she likes. the actual night they presumably had sex.
Yeah.
Um, it's like the way she comes in to relight her candle. She's wearing a loose, open combing jacket of printed flannel. Her white instep shone the opening of her furry slippers, and the blood glowed warmly beneath her perfumed skin. From her hands and wrists, too, as she lit and steadied her candle, a faint perfume arose. And it's like, this is
Like why?
entrapment right here, clearly. you know, you
And you
know,
could almost see like not for this exact situation, but the girl being like, "Well, mom, how could I find a husband?" And then the mom being like, "Well, what you'll want to do," and then her like writing it down, and then be like, "Well, don't forget the perfume." And then she puts on the perfume, like, "I didn't forget the perfume, mom," and goes into the
yeah,
room.
well, the thing is, though, it's like worse about it is they're
Uh-huh.
not even honest to themselves about what they're doing.
Right.
As in they don't. All of these sorts of things would be communicated through, um, surreptitious gestures and furtive glances, not through any kind of explicit phrasing. Like that's all that it would be, and they get to pretend that they're the outraged mother and daughter. Um,
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's the fun of the story in a sense, I think, is the fact that it's not just honest. Like the characters are not always, you can't read these characters as to their word. And the evidence for that is how Joyce describes the whole scenario. Like I think, and that's the skill of Joyce, I think, is the fact that he can describe it in such a way where you know how to read all the readings.
Yeah, it's so perfectly constructed. I mean, it's just more like just stuff. Like he's going upstairs and he's seeing like one of the sons of the madam. I'm not thinking about it, and they just refer to Mrs. Mooney as the madam, which I feel like might be references to brothels. Just slightly, like it's supposed to give you
I
a
could
little
see
bit
it.
of an
Yeah.
hint. Um,
The Madame.
yeah. So I wonder if that's being played there. But it was just like the way he's like seeing like Polly's brother, and just recollecting the way that he was just like someone made like an off color remark about his sister, and he just started going berserk with violence, and the way like he's what is it Mr. Doran is standing at the bottom of the stairs. He looks up. He sees Jack up there, and
Yeah.
just this is a half glance, knowing and like, yeah, he definitely kicking my teeth. He bloody well will put his teeth down his throat, so he would. That's just great. Um,
Yeah, that also reminded me very much of the scene in, I think it's Annie Hall, when like I don't know why I had this thought, but like he Woody Allen meets the younger brother, and the brother is like saying, do you just want to like die? Sometimes I dream about driving my car off the road. And then the next scene is Woody Allen looking white faced as the brother is driving him home.
yeah,
It's like that second encounter after you know what could happen. And so I thought it was really
yeah,
fun.
yeah.
Where
It
here
had
I think it was still pretty funny. He has these little moments that's the moment in this story that's just pure comedy.
well, yeah. Well, I wouldn't say it's comedy. It's ominous here. Like it's
Think
like
so?
it doesn't strike me that way. It strikes me as like here's another thing that just seals the deal on Mr. Doran. Like it's already like
Oh, yeah.
the priest has already exaggerated and inspected every aspect of his sin with him in confession. You have
Which there is the way he describes that. There's certainly a funny Joyce's thoughts on sex are really fun because like I just think it's just there's a little like in that scene where it's like we went over every detail. I don't know what does that mean every detail. I did this motion and then I did this motion. How does it put in here? It was a great
well, I
moment.
yeah, well, it's the recollection of his confession the night before was a cause of acute pain to him. The priest had drawn out every ridiculous detail of the affair, and in the end had so magnified his sin that he was almost thankful at being afforded a loophole of reparation.
Yeah. So on the one hand, doesn't that call into question the maybe I don't know enjoyment of the priest or the magnifying of the, I don't know, whatever it is, it's good.
Yeah, yeah, like when I read that, there's a part of me that wonders whether there is a certain libidinousness on the part of the priest there, but I don't actually quite think so. At least
Yeah.
this is a little bit my bias because of the Portrait of the Artist, because it deals a lot with issues of sexual guilt while being a Catholic. And
Oh, I
those,
forgot. We're in Ireland. this is
yes,
this is a bigger theme than I was like, wow, what a specific theme. And I was like, oh yeah, no, that would have been a big theme.
that's life.
That would it's much more important than it is in my life, for example, as a
Yeah,
non-Christian upbringing.
yeah. So
Yeah, no,
he's
you're right, though. Yeah, there's
yeah.
a
So,
flick.
I think actually the priest is probably not libidinous in any way. It's really just like he just does everything in his power to say you're a dirty sinner, son.
Right. I think that's the correct reading because if Joyce had wanted to push it, which would not have affected the quality, he could have added one sentence that would have flipped it a little that way. But he didn't. So, I think you're right. I would side with you on that. I I think the another deeper thing about it though is the idea that there just is this voice, all like the horror of there's a voice in your head that's saying you fucked up more than anything in the entire world, and you see someone who we would say is a dishonest actor like the priest, right? And he's confirming, yeah, no, it's even worse than your worst fear.
Mhm.
That's what I got too.
Yeah, and the thing like was really like chilling at the very end, which is just delightful, was just how it's set up is Mr. Doran's in his room at first, just like thinking, what the hell am I gonna do? Polly comes in crying to him. He then gets called down to go downstairs to talk to Mrs. Mooney about whatever the about getting married. And Polly is like, she's now alone in the room, and Polly sat for a little time on the side of the bed crying. Then she dried her eyes and went over to the looking glass. She takes care of herself. Um, she rested the nape of her neck against the cool iron bed rail and fell into a reverie. There was no longer any perturbation visible on her face. She waited on patiently, almost cheerfully, without alarm, her memories gradually giving place to hopes and visions of the future, and so on. At last, she heard her mother calling. She started to her feet and ran to the banisters. Polly, Polly, yes, mamma? Come down, dear. Mr. Doran wants to speak to you. The final line is, then she remembered what she had been waiting for.
Yeah, so like we think we're doing a classical ending of ambiguity, right? And it's even more. It's, oh, I wasn't even thinking about that. It's such a great last turn, right? Because it's not this classical, oh, is she resolute in this or in this? It's even worse. It's maybe she is, but she was just off in her own world.
Well, no, let's see. I don't see the ending as being ambiguous at all. Of like, no, Mr. Doran's going to get married. Like, there's just no possible doubt concerning that.
Because everything is just impending that way.
Yeah, it's like, he's got his priest, his employer, you know, Mrs. Mooney, who's a rather intense figure, the brother who's going to beat the shit out of him, um, and Polly, who's crying to him. Like he's there's nothing to stand up against in Mr. Mooney. He's not the kind of character who could withstand that kind of pressure. Um, uh, so I just take it as like for granted that yeah,
So
he's
then the hopes and visions of the future, or she was giving her last cry out to then go and look forward to being married.
well. What I no, I was thinking like, yeah, she's like sort of thinking about that, like, oh, maybe we'll get married and whatever. But
Yeah.
she's so empty-headed.
Yeah.
She's a scatterbrain that she's like sitting in the guy's room and she forgets what she's waiting for. She forgets that she's probably going to get married. Like any other human being in this situation would be in a state of like, anxiety and concern or maybe fervent hope, whatever. But you wouldn't forget about it.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
And that's why it's so Yeah, okay. I actually okay. I'm willing to. I think I buy your reading more. I mean, it's very similar to mine, but like on that, obviously we reached the same conclusion about her stature. It's great because if you think about it, it reminds me of a meme that I saw once, which was like all these teenage girls are fawning over this guy, and he just works at the convenience store, and it's just Kyle. There's nothing about him. And then for Polly, it's the same thing. It's like it's just this girl. There's really like there's a lot of hullabaloo over nothing in a certain sense.
Yeah, like Polly is an empty-headed tart, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Whereas, and the real intelligence here is Mrs. Mooney. Of course, it's the mom. The mom is
Yeah,
this cynic, driving the force of this because she's so airheaded.
yeah, like she's the one with like the forcefulness, and Mr. Dorn, he seems like a nice guy, you know. He's a very Joycean protagonist.
Yeah, yeah,
Like he's very much like you can see the kid from Araby. You know, this is what happens to him later in life, sadly. Um,
yeah. He grows up to become Mr. Doran,
yeah, like
kind
that.
of like that.
Yeah, but okay. So moving on to a little cloud, which I guess if we wanted to move further, we could think of this. Oh, and this is what happens to Mr. Doran a few years later. Um,
Yeah, we've patterned out a whole of like a goofy little lifestyle here.
yeah,
76. Okay.
yeah,
Oh, it's
so,
the next one.
yeah. So
This story was um I think this and the last one we read, I think they were both like masterpieces
yeah,
for me. I think they're sort of like in their own league a little. Like the other two are, don't get me wrong, great stories, but these two are sort of like, oh, here we go.
yeah,
You're
yeah,
hitting with big leagues.
yeah. It's I have to say my favorite was the last one we'll cover, which is a painful case.
Me
Um,
too.
but yeah. So, but yeah, a little cloud, a little cloud. This thing's a marvel. Just so you know, just so again, so everyone knows, it's like we have this character, Little Chandler. Yes, people call him that as an adult. Um,
And it's very important that
yes,
that's
it's
there.
exceptionally important. He's called Little Chandler. Um, he's going to his friend who's like works for the London press. And he's Gallagher, Ignatius Gallagher, who's a rather vulgar kind of person. Um, poor little Chandler wants to be a writer and wants to be a poet, but and is sort of hoping to get a connection through that. They have a dinner and he realizes they don't have any connection. He goes back home. He tries to read a bit of poetry, sort of nursing that hope a little bit in his soul. And then the baby starts crying. He can't have any control over it, and it just ends with him just, his wife taking the baby away from him, trying to calm it down. He's just in the corner, just like, this is my fucking life. Um, but it's great.
Yeah.
It's great. All right, so we start us off here, Chris.
It's funny. So Anna, by the way, Anna has read all of these, and I was like, I love this story, and I described it, and Anna was like, I mean, that sounds like something amazing. I don't remember it because it was like 8 years ago, but I was like, well, we're gonna reread it at some point together. But I so one thing that's nice is there is a little bit of a turn here that becomes very violent in a great way. Or not very violent, appropriately violent,
Mhm.
where he visits this guy and he's as an adult realizes he's just a schmuck. Like he's just a total tool, right? Like he's not even letting him speak. He's just a newspaper guy also. Like it's not even like he's like that great, but he's puffing himself up, and little Chandler kind of sees through that now as an adult 8 years later. He's starting to see through it. But it still affects him as if the other guy had this deeply romantic lifestyle.
Yeah, there's just so many things. Let me just yeah, like one thing is like he's remembering him like when he was younger, Gallagher, and like
Yeah.
just the way that Gallagher was, what's just like there was a certain kind of tenacity that he had. The way he would just sort of say something like, what was the phrase? Let me just see. Oh yeah, halftime now, boys. He used to say lightheartedly. Where's my considering cap? And also description of there was always a certain something in Ignatius Gallagher that impressed you in spite of yourself. Even when he was out at elbows and his wits' end for money, he kept a bold face. Little Shannon remembered, and the remembrance brought a slight flush of pride to his cheeks. One of Ignatius' sayings when he used to be in tight in this way, I said, "Halftime, boys." Where's my like? There's just something great about that. Of like, yeah, the guy's down out, he's in a tough position, but he's figuring his way through things.
Yeah.
Like that's an appealing quality. But yeah, and like then it like as you're saying the disillusionment, he says, little Chandler said nothing until the barman returned with two glasses. Then he touched his friend's glasses lightly and reciprocated the former toast. He was beginning to feel somewhat disillusioned. Gallagher's accent and way of expressing himself did not please him. There was something vulgar in his friend which he had not observed before. But
Mm.
perhaps it was only a result of living in London. The old personal charm was still uh, there under his new gaudy manner. And just in terms of like the gaudy manner, it's just he at one point he's just asking, "Is Paris quite as immoral as they say, Gallagher?" And then he basically gives him the whole tour of the immoralities of Europe and gives the crown of sin to Berlin.
I thought when I obviously my reading changed as I went, but my first reading was psychologically that Ignatius Gallagher has not been to Paris. He may have been to all these other places, but not Paris because of his hesitation in a certain. Have you been to Paris? I should think I have. I've knocked about there a little. And is it so really beautiful? He sipped a little, so he delays. He sips a little of his drink, finishes his boldly. Beautiful, said Ignatius Gallagher, pausing on the word, on the flavor of his drink. Oh no, that was just a wrong first impression. He's obviously been to Paris. Sorry, the first time I read it, I got this sense that he was delaying because he was like a liar, but he wasn't a liar. He was just a
No,
puffer. Sorry.
I can see why you would read it that way.
Yeah, but I don't actually read that on a second time through.
No, I actually I sort of like that. I mean, as in, I agree with it. You're originally wrong, but that's very
Yeah,
plausible to start off with. Of like, you're not
I mean,
saying a
because he
lot.
can sort of say anything.
Yeah,
Like he could lie. I mean,
yeah. Well, like I feel like if he was lying, he would have just said, "Oh yeah, it's real beautiful out there." Like he would have like that would be what he said instead of like contradicting him.
yeah, I think that's a good point. But even so, I think the language he used. Ooh, here might be the real reading that I get why I had those impressions. It's a little vague,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
there's no city for Paris like gaiety, movement, excitement. Like these are just that's the city. That's all cities, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Not all cities, but it's just kind of vague and you kind of wonder he's suspect. I'll say it that way.
Oh,
And
he's
Joyce
a
does a
suspect.
great job at making
Like,
him deeply suspect the
like the
whole time.
thing is about Ignatius Gallagher is he's a very Trumpian kind of figure.
Oh yeah, he's bullshitting. He's just bullshitting. It doesn't
Oh
matter
no,
what the
I'm
truth
not.
is.
No, as in I'm not going to say he's like lying, but I
Yeah.
just mean in the sense of he's a big braggart jackass who likes to feel big about himself. Like I remember, like Trump has like I think there's like some speech or something somewhere where he's just saying like the friends you're gonna really love, guys, and this is like a commencement speech somewhere. The friends you're gonna really love, guys, are the people who didn't do so well in their life because you're gonna go and see them and you're gonna feel so much better than them. Like he literally says this. Like how does a human being say that? But this
Well,
is
but
this,
You're right.
literally
Gallagher would say
this
that.
is
That would be his next
literally
conversation.
yeah, this is literally basically like how Ignatius. It's why he spends time with little Chandler.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's confirmed by the fact that at the end of the story, he's like, "No, I can't. We can't. I can't come over for dinner." He's like, he didn't really want to actually spend time with him.
yeah, yeah. So it's like so he's not lying, but there is something deeply insincere about his whole manner.
Yeah,
Um,
it's almost. I guess one way to read it, and I tell me what you think about this way, is that he's just absolutely no different than what he was 8 years ago.
I'd say, well, one thing it says like there's a new gaudiness to him. There's something sort of there's still the tenacity from when he was younger, but he's now just so much more full of himself.
Ah,
He has the vanity of like being a press man. You know,
which is just it's just funny because you're reading it back and you're like, "So you're a reporter.
I mean, being a reporter like
Good
that's
job. It's a good career."
yeah, that no, that's a high status career. People people make a big deal out of being working for a big newspaper.
Yeah, yeah, you know what? You're right. Sorry. I'm not to shit on reporters, but I think that should be reserved for our novelists.
Well, I mean, what I really say is it should be reserved to our literary critics, um, like ourselves.
No, it's like, look, you got all that death mail for giving that book the 1 star it deserved. Like, you're the real
No,
MVP
I, that was a joke for us, man. Like
for us.
we're the
Oh,
one who
we're
deserves
yeah.
all the fame, like these fucking authors. Like, oh, yeah, that's a good bit of wordsmithing, but let me tell you what's wrong.
Oh
Um,
yeah, well,
okay,
I agree. I would
but
love to read transcripts more than Joyce.
I I've spat all over my Dubliners because of that. But great. Okay, but getting back to okay, because the real star of the show is Little Chandler,
Yeah.
and it's just so he's a he does feel this little, but he's like so like I mean, I'm not gonna say sweet exactly, but he just feels like it's yeah, just like one thing is this. He remembered the books of poetry upon his shelves at home. He had bought them in his bachelor days, and many an evening as he sat in the little room off the hall, he had been tempted to take one down from the bookshelf and read it out out something to his wife. But shyness had always held him back, and so the books remained at their shelves. At times he played lines to himself, and this consoled him. He's too shy to read poetry to his wife? Like,
I forgot that line. That's it's a beautiful. It's great. You're right. It's important because if he can't read poems to his wife, there's no way he's going to be able to say no to another drink from this guy.
yeah, well, one thing that's interesting is he also gets yeah, we'll talk more in a minute, but
Yeah.
there's like just the way like I mean like, just other things like little Shabler gave them no thought. Let's see who's the they. Oh yeah, that's all the other people. Um, he picked his way deftly through all the minute vermin-like life and under the shadow of the gaunt spectral mansions in which the old nobility of Dublin had roistered. No memory of the past touched him, for his mind was full of the present. Yeah, that was the excitement of him going out to see Gallagher. And so again, I have to say, like that's almost exactly what happened in Araby. The first thing I quoted
Hmm.
of like, he's just like he's surrounded by all the vulgarity of people singing tedious tunes and I don't know, homeless people or whatever it is out there, and he's got inside of him this like chalice of romantic emotions. Like he was the same thing. Like yeah, he's surrounded by all this vermin-like life. What a great little phrase. Um,
Yeah. And I think that is a theme that the more I read, because I only read 4 of them, but I'm obviously going to finish these because they're just like candy.
yeah,
Um,
it's great stuff.
I wonder if that is one of those Joyce shining through, like Joyce's subjectivity
Yeah,
shining
like
through. I
that.
wonder if Joyce feels that way.
Yeah, like that. That's my very strong feeling that that's
Mhm.
his sense of life. And
Yeah.
I haven't finished Ulysses, but I'm like 200 pages in, and taking a break right now. And that's kind of my sense of like, oh, you have these like nice, thoughtful people. Maybe not even like intellectual, really, but at least
Mhm.
thoughtful.
Yeah.
And it's just this like oh it's this cesspool around them, not in the sense of being like murderers or rapists or something like that, but just
Sure.
vaguely sickly, like
Yeah. That's Dublin in the early 20th century.
uh, just this very not tepid, what's the other word for it? Fetid atmosphere. um
Yeah. I wonder if he just got that. I wonder if that's just natural. Like, I wonder if that's just what Dublin was like at
well,
this
like that's what Shaw says is he found when he read Ulysses, George Bernard Shaw, he was just sort of overwhelmed by the sense of like, yes, this is exactly the Dublin I grew up in. Um,
time.
like it was strikingly realistic to him. Um, but anyway, getting back to what's at hand.
Yeah, yeah.
Even when yeah. So oh my god, but like one thing that was like so sad is he's thinking about like becoming a writer, you know. And he's just sort of observing like, like the just this sort of like miserable bit of tenements described as being a band of tramps huddled together along the riverbanks, their old coats covered with dust, and stood stupefied by the panorama of the sunset and waiting for the first chill of night to bid them arise, shake themselves, and be gone. He wondered whether he could write a poem to express his idea. Perhaps Gallagher might be able to get into some London paper for him. Could he write something original? He was not sure what idea he wished to express, but the thought that a poetic moment had touched him took life within him like an infant hope. It's like that's
Ooh,
like there's something inside of little Chandler. Like there is
there's
some
something inside. Yeah.
yeah, like there's like he wants to be able to convey it. He can't he hasn't conveyed it like Joyce just conveyed it to us now. Like Joyce literally just wrote us a little poem about like what that moment on the bridge was like, which is great.
It's one of my favorite meta, not meta textual, but sort of goofy maneuvers is when there's an opportunity that arises for someone to write a great thing, and the artist doing something else, not writing poetry but writing fiction, can just deliver on that moment really well. It
Yeah,
always it always gets me.
yeah. You were reading the Seggers that way a while ago. The Lord's
Oh
Prayer.
yeah,
There was that
yeah.
moment. Um, and
That was a great there. Yeah, I agree with that
yeah,
in her.
and but the and again, he's just hoping to do that so much. He felt them within him. He tried to weigh his soul to see if it was a poet's soul. Melancholy was the dominant note of his temperament, but it was a melancholy tempered by recurrences of faith and resignation and simple joy. If he could give expression to it in a book of poems, perhaps men would listen. And then it's just like so great at the very end. He's imagining, like the praises they'll have. Mr. Chandler has a gift of easy and graceful verse. A wistful sadness pervades these poems. The Celtic note. And
The
finally,
Celtic note is great.
yeah, the Celtic note, like that's just oh yes, like you're representing the national character right there. Wonderful.
Well, I mean, and Joyce has probably just heard, oh, this regional Irish writer, and he's probably just heard some phrase. These are just phrases he's heard about himself.
Yeah, and it just like and then the final note. It was a pity his name was not more Irish looking. Perhaps it would be better to insert his mother's name before the surname, Thomas Malone Chandler. Or better still, T. Malone Chandler. You speak to Gallagher about it. Which is just like so fucking sad.
It's so
It's like
sad because he doesn't get a word in with
it
Gallagher.
barely gets a word in with the guy, but it's just
Yeah.
like you're going to talk. Oh, should I? I want to become a writer here. Gallagher. Should I go by Thomas Malone Chandler or T Malone Chandler? It's like you can just see like the look of like indifference and contempt, like just that pause as like he's just like looking down and like, what are you talking about? I'm not gonna get you published.
But
um,
you haven't written anything.
yeah, he hasn't written anything, but it's also like he doesn't. It's just that feeling of like he would never do that favor for him. Like he
No.
doesn't have enough of an opinion of him, and like he's someone who's completely indifferent to poetry. Why would he be pushing that? It's just so childlike in its a childlike view of that relationship. You get think it's disillusioned
Oh
by it.
yeah.
Yeah. What is it? It's just marvelous. It's
It's
marvelous.
marvelous. So another thing that is about that is, so he's daydreaming here, right? And in part he's daydreaming because he's shy and passive. And even when someone's doing what he wants, it's described passively, as if someone else is doing the action. So if you look, uh little Chandler allowed his whiskey to be very much diluted. Even in what he wants, it's still someone else doing the action. He's not getting to do a lot of things for himself in this
Yeah,
story.
yeah. Like there was something a little bit on that. Yeah, and one thing he does actually like want a third drink. like he does have a little bit of like boisterous motion at the end, but that's sort of like when he's sort of all caught up in like the spirit of the night,
Oh
and
yeah,
he's
you're right. Yeah.
but that's exceptional in a sense. It's like, yeah, like okay, he this is as good as it gets for him. Um,
But sorry to our readers, for different ecological phenomena, both Ray and I have terrible allergies.
yeah,
Like sniffling the whole time we're talking.
yeah. For some reason, like, I
Oh,
guess it's this feeling of physical weakness is thematically relevant to the reading. I don't know, but
it helps get into the mindset when you're a little ill, a little tepid.
yeah, when you just want to fucking die. But that, um,
So I had a couple other things that I thought were interesting.
yeah.
This is like a type of story that I think has translated in America. It's like it's kind of similar to like the guy who it's like well it's not similar, it's an inversion on the guy who is like a high school football player. And I mean it's the Bruce Springsteen song Glory Days, where he lived out his glory days and he was a celebrity in high school and everyone's kind of moved on. And it's not the same obviously because everyone's grown up a little, but what reminds me of that theme is just the idea that even though little Chandler is passive, there is the sense in my mind that he's winning more something ethically, or he
Um,
still has some power that the roguish Ignatius Gallagher just cannot have, some human kernel that
I mean,
isn't
it's,
there.
there's no doubt that. Okay, if you ask me, who would you rather be, Little Chandler or Ignatius Gallagher? My answer is suicide. Um,
Fair enough.
it's neither of these characters. In a
Yeah.
um, Little Chandler is a human being. Like that's one thing we have. Gallagher is, he's Trumpian, and that's just no, no. I'd rather be dead.
So we're in
Um,
agreement that we could be around little Chandler.
yeah, we'd like to be around Little Chandler.
Yeah,
Like
exactly. I agree.
we'd like to read a book with him.
You
Like
point at the wall and say, "You can practice those poems on me if you need to get some courage for your wife."
yeah, like I can be very endearing that, but I mean here it's almost, I guess actually to use your sort of metaphor, I'm more thinking of it's like for some reason you have like sort of the football star actually ends up in going have a successful career in business or whatever, and he's
Yeah.
having lunch with the little dormouse quiet kid from school, and you know it goes down this way.
Yeah,
um
like little Chandler doesn't care about Paris.
yeah,
Little Chandler, like he's
well, I think I think he does like the idea of the excitement, like he does want to get out there, but he's
right. Yeah.
so, I mean, I would just imagine him literally shivering with fear on the boat. But he'd get over it, but it'd still be like, that's how I imagine him. But yeah, there's just great stuff. But oh god, how he? Let's see. Oh god, but just like, okay, so like, okay, so it ends, like that whole conversation between them, and it's one thing that's sort of funny about it is like it ends on the note of like marriage issue of someday, referring to marriage. Someday you will, said little Chandler calmly. Ignatius Gallagher turned his orange tie and slate blue eyes full upon his friend. You think so? He said. You put your head in the sack, repeated little Chandler stoutly, like everyone else if you can find the girl. He had slightly emphasized his tone. He was aware that he had betrayed himself. As in, like, there's a sense of everybody gets married eventually. You'll get caught up too. Like, he's saying this in a sense resentfully to Ignatius Gallagher. And later
Which is
on,
relevant to the
Gallagher
end
is
of the
saying
story.
like, "What? Yeah,
Which is relevant to the end of the story.
yeah."
What you just
And
read.
Gallagher is going and is sort of responding, "Well, I'll get a rich Jewess, don't you doubt it." Um,
Yeah. I loved it. Like my eyes, it's so funny. They roll like all of this with incredible enjoyment, but they rolled all the way into the back of my head and all the way around.
yeah,
It's
it was such vicious pro-Semitism.
yeah, what was that? But it was also just like this idea of like even if even if you're right, you're wrong.
Yeah,
Right? Like he's just so Gallagher is just so inhuman in so many
yeah.
ways.
But the thing is like but I'm in no hurry. They can wait. I don't fancy tying myself up to one woman. He imitated with his mouth the act of tasting and made a wry face. Must get a bit stale, I should think, he said. Now that's like. There's two things that are perfect about this. Of one thing is that's relevant to Ignatius, no, to Little Chandler. If Little Chandler did get married, he did get hooked. And the same thing with Mr. Doran in the last story is like, Ignatius Gallagher would get the hell out of there. He's not waiting around for any Paula and Mrs. Mooney to strangle him.
Yeah, well, he's one of the other guys referenced.
Yeah, yeah,
Wasn't caught in the trap. Yeah.
yeah. It's like he's and I just love that. I just love just that way he says that of he imitated with his mouth the act of tasting, made a wry face. Must get a bit stale, I should. That's his reaction to marriage, which is, I think, actually pretty accurate with the marriage we even end up seeing. Is it's a bit stale.
Yeah.
It's not like bitterly awful in a sense. It's not like Strindberg, like we're torturing each other to death kind of misery. It's more just like, it's sour. It's stale. So like that's good. That's clever. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the great. I mean, he does his not anacrusis. That's a musical. I just used a musical term for literature. Not ellipses. Cut,
Yeah,
cut scene.
yeah. That's in cut scene, which is it's a wonderful little transition to like a bit stale, isn't it? And then we see staleness.
Yeah, and he goes, Little Chandler, to save money, they kept no servant, but Annie's young sister Monica came for an hour or so in the morning and an hour or so in the evening, and it's just like this kind of boring, somewhat not not destitute but poor. It's like they're fine but they're bored sort of thing.
Yeah, and it was just like he was looking at a picture of Annie's photograph, his wife, um,
Yeah,
and he's just like looking at the dress, and it's this sort of sad story about the dress. But the thing is that he's looking at her face is certainly they were pretty, and the face itself was pretty, referring to the eyes. But he found something mean in it. Why was it unconscious and ladylike? The composure of the eyes irritated him. They repelled him and defied him. There was no passion in them, no rapture. He thought of what Gallagher had said about rich Jewesses, those dark oriental eyes, he thought, how full of passion they are, voluptuous longing. Why did he marry the eyes in the photograph?
that sentence, why had he married the eyes in the photograph, is just really good.
Yeah, it really is.
uh,
Um, God. And
but that's the sort of thing where it's like, even though he and that's maybe I'm having a misreading. Maybe Little Chandler. Oh no, we went over it. He does the illusion is dispelled with Gallagher, and yet it still has an effect. It still produces this resentment about his own position.
Yeah, but at least Gallagher's got a colorful life. Gallagher
Yeah.
has he didn't Gallagher's life isn't stale. That's one thing we can say. Um, and this is another like, great thing like about his wife of he caught himself up at the question and glanced nervously around the room. He found something mean in the pretty furniture which he had bought for his house in the hire system. Annie had chosen it herself and reminded him of her. It was too pretty and prim. A dull resentment against life awoke within him. It's like that's just great. That's just great. Like this is something
Yeah.
to. I mean, that's the thing about her is she's stale. there's just something stale about her. Um,
Well, to him, I don't think it really matters how she actually is.
well, yeah, well, to him, but I think like in I think this is just like a reasonable thing to like react to. Like this is like I've seen this in women's faces sometimes, and I guess men. I'm sure men are the same way, but I don't know.
Oh yeah.
But like sometimes there's a girl who like I don't know, she looks pretty, but I just look at her and I'm like, but where's the soul? Like you
Well,
see, like
the
you see,
guy version of that is the Kyle meme I was mentioning earlier. It's just Dylan at the convenience store from high school. I agree. Yeah, but I think the point is it doesn't really matter. What only matters is his resentment.
yeah, yeah,
I
that's the
think
fundamental thing.
like for example, if this was a real story, and he got paranoid and asked his friend, "Look into her eyes," that would be the moment of the love triangle where the other person sees the bold. That it just doesn't really matter. Someone else could see Annie as
Yeah, yeah.
something.
Ultimately, it doesn't, but I do think it's a good thing that, at least for the story, that's like, no, she is wooden. There is just something
Yeah,
soulless about her.
yeah, and there is, and there's also like maybe there's more to why he didn't read the poetry to her. Like
Yeah,
if he views her as wooden in this story, then what's the point of reading poetry to the
yeah.
person?
Like there is legitimacy to
Yeah.
that. Like yeah, like it would fall on deaf ears. Um,
Well, we're just buttering it up, but this then the best thing happens. He doesn't read poetry to the wife. He reads it to the
yeah,
baby.
incidentally, yeah. Like
Which
he's
I just
holding the baby in his arms. His wife has
yeah,
left to go to the store and is about to come back, and he's just like
yeah, yeah.
reading a bit of Byron. Who actually he mentions Byron in other works, so you think it is a genuine favorite of Joyce. But he's like he reads the line. It's a nice line. He says he paused. He felt the rhythm of the verse about him in the room. How melancholy it was. Could he too write like that? To express the melancholy of his soul in verse? There are so many things he wanted to describe. His sensation of a few hours before on the Granton Bridge, for example. If he could get back again in that mood. The child awoke and began to cry. He turned from the page and tried to hush it, but it would not be hushed. He began to rock it to and fro in his arms, but his wailing cry grew keener. He rocked it faster while his eyes began to read the second stanza. Within his narrow cells reclined Sir Clay. The clay were what? It was useless. He couldn't read. He couldn't do anything. The wailing of the child pierced the drum of his ears. It was useless, useless. He was a prisoner for life. His arms trembled with anger, and suddenly bending to the child's face, he shouted, "Stop!" The child
Yeah.
stopped for an instant, had a spasm of fright, and began to scream. That's just perfect. That's just
That's
perfect.
great. I also so just like a little phenomenology when it went to the second thing within the narrow cell reclines her clay, I was reading that frantically fast as if like a baby was interrupting me, and then
Yeah, yeah,
like my reading tempo sped up at the second part,
yeah. That's a good
which
one.
I think he orchestrated it to for me.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a good insight there, and it's just, and I just love that moment of he finally just he just yells at the child, "Stop!" And the child stopped for an instant, had a spasm of fright, and began to scream. Just that little bit of like, there's a moment of quiet, and then it comes crashing down even worse. I mean, crashing down even worse. That's just beautiful.
And it's also what's also great is that's his, he doesn't write a poem, he shouts at his baby. The active thing he does in this work is like it's so passive, and finally the moment that's active is everything boils over. You
Yeah,
know,
it's like, well, and then like, well, I'm not quite exactly sure what happens here, but I think He tried to soothe it, but it sobbed more convulsively. He looked at the contracted and quivering face of the child and began to be alarmed. He counted 7 sobs without a break between them and caught the child to his breath in fright. If it died, then the door burst open. A young woman ran in. But it's like he actually thinks about infanticide in this moment. That's how I'm reading it. If it died, when he like clutches it to his chest. Like
Oh
he
yeah, of course.
yeah, I just want to be clear. Um, and it just I
Well, you know, if it
understand where
died,
he's coming from. I'm just gonna flat out say I understand where he's coming from.
I mean, I don't have any babies. And, you know, it's because every time you hear of shaken baby syndrome, I'm like, well, yeah, because it's screaming and poops and doesn't have a personality.
Yeah, I'm gonna say again. I'm gonna like in real life. I can see it being. I'm not gonna endorse infanticide, uh, but I'm gonna say at least emotionally in
Neither
this
will
story,
I.
in the universe of this story, I can understand where it's coming from. At least the burst of frustration.
I think another thing to call our attention to is how subtle it is that the thought is implied. And I think it's partially punctuation. So if it had just said, if it died, exclamation mark, I
Yeah,
think it implies less entertaining the thought than the ellipses. Exclamation ellipses is a very specific combination of punctuation that implies like a really specific thought
yeah,
process.
yeah. As in, it's a thought so horrible that you don't think about it. You know.
Yeah. And it just leaves a sort of space void.
Yeah, like it's like you know what's behind this ellipsis here, ellipses. Um, and it's like it's just like the way like she takes the child away from him, and she's like getting it to quiet down, and you just it's already like it's like fumbling and impossible he is with the child, and it just ends on that line. Little Chandler felt his cheeks suffused with shame, and he stood back out of the lamplight. He listened while the paroxysm of the child sobbing grew less and less. The tears of remorse started to his eyes. And like that's like
Mm-hmm.
what's so suffocating about this is like he regrets. He's like crying from remorse of the fact that he yelled at the child and he thought about killing it. Um, like that's how locked up he is here, emotionally.
Yeah.
There's no, like it's just like Mr. Duran, where it's like, no, he's just the universe is dead set against you, buddy. Like you have no self defense here. You can't break out of this engagement that's gonna happen to you.
Yeah.
So like that's just great. Just great.
Yeah.
Um,
I thought it was great. Yeah, no critiques. Just I just think it also I think it shows the this one is slightly more on the side of loneliness as personal escape, like a positive thing where he's kind of daydreaming when he's alone about being a poet, and it's interrupted by the stifling life around him. This one is the loneliness isn't as much there, but it's almost like he wants to escape in a sense, and when he escapes into daydreams.
well, let's see. He's not. Okay, this is. I'm not disagreeing. This is just my feeling.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, no. Just I mean, any critique is good to make
yeah,
it
yeah,
more
no, no.
specific.
I'm just. I don't even feel he gets a chance to escape into daydreams. I think even the
Yeah,
fact that he's walking along and has this feeling on the bridge is exceptional for him. The idea of him like even just sort of surreptitiously like reading a bit of poetry. It's like all it ever. No, he never bothers to read poetry. All that he ever does at most is like he'll recite a few lines he's memorized from his bachelorhood. You know,
yeah.
like he doesn't
No,
get to daydream. He gets maybe a brief glimmer of emotion, and that's it. That's it.
I mean that kind of felt like the last. I mean, obviously, um, On and I have an amazing my wife of 10, not 10 years, many years, but we've been together 10 years. I have a great life, but part of the reason why I'm happy not to go back to the university in the fall and to do other work is because I haven't had space to daydream or to be at the end of a PhD, it's just like attack, things, stuff, crap. And I, so on that level I can understand that, where at the end of it it's just this onslaught of really meaningless crap, most of it.
Yeah,
uh so
yeah,
it's kind of nice, like this summer I do feel like I have been able to read my poetry from childhood or whatever he's doing here. Proof is in doing the podcast, right? It's like, well, I obviously have space to do this, and it would never have worked the last year of the PhD. So I think on that level there is still a personal relevance to me. This one obviously I didn't really, I wasn't looking for that. With like Araby, it's like, oh my God, there are just memories I have that are just literally this feeling. With this one, I just felt like it was just a masterful stroke of writing.
yeah. It was a marvelous, just that vision of, well, just another sensitive soul being suffocated by the world around him. Um,
Yeah.
Rushing.
Another, well, this one very sensitive. So,
Yeah,
you just grab his cheeks.
yeah. So, yeah, poor little Chandler. Um, it's fun. It's I hate to say, like, it's so on the nose that it's called little. He just calls him Little Chandler, but it's so deserved. It's so right.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, Joyce is very concerned with names, which is why I started looking into it, is because there's a lot of evidence from the text that the names matter. And look, like the example of Little Chandler being Little Chandler throughout means that Joyce is paying attention to that. And so we can always look at the name for not a deep symbolism, but just a basic level of positioning, just basically, not overlooking at it. So yeah, I really liked that.
Yeah. So I guess let's move on to the final one, a painful case, which is my personal favorite of the
As
bunch.
was mine. I finished it right before we talked. It was my favorite too.
Yeah, it's a marvel. It's a marvel of a work of art. Um, so just again for the audience, what happens? Yeah, Mr. James Doofy is a very cold, impersonal, intelligent, conscientious. No, I won't say snob exactly, but certainly someone who looks down on humanity. Um, who it just is very cold and detached, but happens to meet a woman at a concert, and they sort of have they get to know each other, spend time together. Eventually, it becomes clear that she loves him. He cuts it off because he feels that's wrong. Cuts it off
Mhm.
totally and brutally. Um, Reads in the paper that she dies, and
Hold on, wait. Years later, four
years
years.
later, years
It
later, like
doesn't
four
even
years,
give a
4 years.
cut. It's just another paragraph.
Yeah,
4 years pass.
4 years pass, and regrets his fucking life. Um, After that,
And
but
in that way, this story, wow, this is one of the best Chekhov stories I've ever read.
yeah, you're right about that. Like there is a yeah, let's see. I did keep thinking when I read this about a Chekhov story, a man the man in the case, because it's about a very cold and personal human being.
Mm.
But the thing is that that's a bad character in that book. Like it is just one of these people who's like suffocating you with
Mm.
these stringent rules. So when he dies, it's like yeah, good riddance. Here it's very different. Like it's repression because he's been hurt by life, or no, it's repression because life is just not worthy of it. And one thing I really liked here, just as a bit of characterization at the beginning, is it says like in his desk lay a manuscript translation of Hauptmann's Michael Kramer, the stage directions of which are written in purple ink and a little sheaf of papers held together by a brass pin. So like this is how he spends his time, like translating Hauptmann. Um, in the
He's kind of like Schopenhauer. He kind of shuts himself away.
yeah, like it's in his drawer. It's not something he's like submitting to publishers. Presumably, it's like, oh yeah, this is my exercise. But the thing is, I really like, and there's Hauptmann, which is like thematically relevant on an emotional level. Um,
Yeah.
I have a feeling that like Joyce really loves Hauptmann because he also mentions him in other works. Um,
Okay.
but In these sheets, a sentence was inscribed from time to time. And in an ironical moment, the headline of an advertisement for bile beans had been pasted to the first sheet, which is great. Like I
Wow.
love that of just like he has this, sensitive work by Gerhard Hauptmann, with these, fragile, sensitive beings who are also sort of crushed by the world around them. Um, and he puts on it like in an ironical moment, just this sort of bile beam. I mean, just the name bile, like the stuff that comes out of you or whatever. Like even when you get wounded, bile beans. I presume that's someone's actual name, bile, but
And
uh,
the specific, I forget the specific name of the phonetic alliteration, but Isle Eanes.
yeah,
It's this
and it's
B
like
sound. It's so it's brutish.
yeah, and it's like the way like that's put together of it's vault. It's like he's putting on like, yeah, here's a delicate work, and let me put something vulgar on top of it because that's just life. That's just how things are. Like where just like
Yeah,
some
I
cheap
mean,
advertisement has to be connected with this.
yeah, like if you look at my own room, here's a watermelon beer behind my Deleuze and Claude Levi Strauss. It's like a similar. It's just it's a slice of life thing, but it also is a theme that you have called our attention to on every story, which is the positioning of the vulgar versus the whatever is maybe holy or something
Yeah,
that is.
I didn't even think about it in that sense. Yeah, like this is in a certain way a self-conscious way of, a chalice of romantic feelings, a sort of bursting joy of, becoming a writer, um, or, the sensitive writings of Gerhard Hauptmann surrounded by vulgarity. Um, that's great.
Yeah. And I'm
That's
so sorry.
great.
I actually interrupted you. Could you finish the paragraph? Because
Oh,
it really confirms what we're talking about. I'm sorry.
no, I think I stopped that. But on lifting the lid of the desk, a faint fragrance escaped. The fragrance of new cedarwood pencils, or of a bottle of gum, or of an overripe apple which might have been left there and forgotten. I feel like that's more just like that's a sort of a nice
Stuff.
sort of set of smells coming out.
Sure.
Um,
Although I'm going to let you know, I don't know what a bottle of gum is.
Bottle of, yeah, and I don't, and to be frank, I'm not really sure. I mean, apples smell nice, and even overripe ones sort of, but I don't know what it'd be like in your desk for weeks. Although one time I had a banana in my backpack for like for like a month, and it was just
Oh
like
no.
it just like ruined my backpack. I had to put in like the it's disgusting. It was disgusting, man.
Oh,
Um,
oh no.
um, yeah. And it really wrecked my translation of Strindberg. But no, no, I'm kidding. Um, um, yeah,
The
but
banana souffle Strindberg combo
yeah.
there. Trash.
All right. So getting back to
I also like the phrase, it's like the next one. A medieval doctor would have called him Saturnine.
yeah, yeah. His cheekbones also gave his face a harsh character, but there was no harshness in his eyes, which looked at the world under their tawny eyebrows, gave the impression of a man ever alert to greet a redeeming instinct in others, but often disappointed. He lit. Oh, now that's great. Like he's hoping there's something. He's on the lookout, but nope, nope. He lived at a little distance from his body, regarding his own acts with doubtful side glance. That gives a sense of like, he doesn't
Disassociation.
almost. That's kind of what I'm imagining is like it's like looking at for a sin in himself. He had
Mm.
an odd autobiographical habit which led him to compose in his mind from time to time a short sentence about himself containing a subject in the third person and a predicate in the past tense. He never gave alms to beggars and walked firmly carrying a stout haze. I just love that autobiographical habit. It's like the things that
Yeah.
I'm doing are by some third person in the past. Um, just a perfect sense of detachment. Um, his evenings were spent either before his landlady's piano or roaming about the outskirts of the city. His liking for Mozart's music brought him sometimes to an opera or a concert. These were the only dissipations of his life. Like,
There is there
wow.
is a sort of romantic comedy aspect to the. I mean, obviously we turn it away that a romantic comedy would never do, but there is sort of a. Have you ever seen the movie Stranger Than Fiction?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that, and the only watchable like Will Ferrell movie. It's like that's like the least Will Ferrell movie.
Well, I like Barbie. He was in there.
Was he in Barbie? I'm actually okay. I'm gonna see both of them this week, and then there's a horror movie I want, so I'm going to see a bunch of movies, and I like I
Barbie's
I'll
a
tell you
fun
that.
movie. Barbie's is a straightforwardly fun movie. It's a bit of like I got issues with it, but I was cackling for most of it.
It's just this vibrant sense of life in an era of a lot of dark colors in cinema. I'm looking at you, Oppenheimer, man. I love his movies too, don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
But I like the vibrant color schemes in films that a lot of them that the best ones can do. I'll be watching it this week. I'll get back to you. Maybe we do an episode on Barbie and
Barbenheimer.
Oppenheimer.
Yeah, maybe.
Um,
I don't know.
but there is so the stranger than fiction aspect I'm saying is it's obviously more perfectly written here than stranger than fiction, but there is a sense that he's not home in the world. Like he's not really like he's just like this thing he dined in an eating house where he felt himself safe from the society of Dublin's gilded youth and where there was a certain plain honesty in the bill of fare. Like a lot of the descriptions are kind of removing him from immersion in the environment.
Yeah, I mean, like this, and you just get these like bits of just sort of frank misanthropy where it's like The first line is Mr. James Dufay lived in chapelized because he wished to live as far as possible from the city of which he was a citizen, and because he found all other suburbs of Dublin mean, modern, and pretentious. As in, it's like
Like
he
the
wants to
real
stay away
upper
from the
guy.
city, just because screw the city and all these other suburbs, just mean, modern, and pretentious. I tell you what, like that's such a great little like. Okay, he's not terribly friendly, uh, and like
I have a friend kind of like this actually, and he luckily it's my friend. I have a composer friend kind of like this, and luckily he's very witty, so it saves him. But because otherwise, I'd be like, "Do you like anything in the world?" You know?
I had a girlfriend who like said that like I was like, yeah, right, like you're just cynical, you're just biting and caustic, and it's like, I don't know, like,
You got to read more literature.
not that.
No, I don't find you that, but maybe because we're in the art scenario, it just it's not like that.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah, the work, but it's just also great. It's like one thing, like he apparently was like attended the meetings of an Irish Socialist Party.
Yeah.
He discontinued his attendances. I just love that way that, like it says it that way because like that's how he would say it. He didn't stop going to meetings. He discontinued his attendances. The workmen's discussions, he said, were too timorous. The interest they took in the question of wages was inordinate. He felt they were hard-featured realists and that they resented an exactitude which was the produce of a leisure not within their reach. No social revolution, he told her, would be likely to strike Dublin for some centuries. I just love that sense of contempt in so many ways, and like, and this is what you were saying of like, Joyce really gets inside of his characters in an individual
God.
way, and it's like the
Yeah.
way it's said, like those fucking words, timorous, inordinate, exactitude. Um, it's like that's just it has that technicality and coldness and well exactitude which just characterizes Mr. James Dufay so
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, and I think that it's like the fact that these verbiages happen in this story is really important because they don't in the other ones. It's a specific tool as you it's so it really shows the technical control of Joyce that he's not writing all characters as verbiage filled or using words like what you said, timorous or just it's like, wow, that's a 5 cent word. But it's not that it's a 5 cent word, it's that it's a kind of a needly bureaucratic, I don't know, almost misanthropic,
Yeah,
robotic.
yeah, it's no, I think you're nailing it there. Like the way Little Chandler would speak is not like that at all. Like it's,
Yeah.
it'd be intelligent, but it's not that kind of precision. The same thing with like Mr. Mooney, like doesn't no, no, excuse me, Mr. Mooney, Mr. Doran. Although we get to know less about him, but it's still there's enough of a feeling of he'd be a little more friendly, a little more out there, a little more lively.
Mr. Doran was just like normal, I guess. I mean, there's
Yeah,
not really,
yeah, like,
he's not almost an everyman, but not really because Joyce is still giving him specificity.
yeah, like, you're right about that. The same thing with the kid from Araby. It's like okay, there is that excitement of youth, that sort of not exactly gaudiness, but just like there's a colorfulness,
Yeah.
romanticism that's distinct from the other one. So like yeah, Joyce is a master. Joyce is
And
a
he's just like, and that's where his variety shines through. And this is also where the reason why this is Chekhov to me is because there's so much in Chekhov of coming alive versus becoming stone or dead or whatever you want to say. Like when I was reading Chekhov, I was really also reading this idea of you only die twice. You have a symbolic death and then you have a real death.
yeah.
I found that was so active only in Chekhov. None of the other people we're reading, I found that to be an active theme until we got to this story, and I was like, no, everybody dies twice, you know.
Yeah, yeah. It's one difference with Chekhov though is Chekhov doesn't want to have a single dramatic moment. Like Joyce wants, it's more like you die from the sediment of years in Chekhov. While while in Joyce, it's like no, like you do actually get that clear period. Like yes, I died today. Um,
Yeah, it's a little bit more hard. I mean, I know I'm sorry I use this metaphor a lot. Slightly harder edges, and the Chekhov is slightly softer.
yeah, well, softer to the point of there are no edges. It's just this gaseous mist of like, yeah,
Mm.
you just sort of suffocated like over time. Anyway, but yeah, it's just okay. So I actually meets Mrs. Sinico. I think that's how I pronounce it. At a concert. They meet actually a couple of times.
Hmm.
And they start, going for walks together. And, this is so him. Um, this was the first of many meetings. They met always in the evening and chose the most quiet quarters for their walks together. Mr. Doofy, however, had a distaste for underhand ways, and finding they were compelled to meet stealthily, he forced her to ask him to her house. Well, I just love the social touch there. He forced her to ask him to her house. It's like
Yeah.
he's not saying like you better invite me. It's like he lays the hints or just makes it socially inescapable for her to like, well, I have to do that or it's going to look like a snub. So I like that, and it's also like his very stern. I don't want to say uprightness because it's not a good quality ultimately. Um, but it's just like this rigid moralism.
But it is a tragic quality, and I think it'd be Duffy, just like the regular. At least that'd be the American way, Mr. Duffy.
Let's say Duffy. Let's say Duffy. Um,
Either way is fine with me because I am not Irish and
yeah, yeah.
I've heard enough. But so that rigid quality, I mean, really, like basically what's going on here in a certain like oversimplified sense is she represents a sort of returning to life that he could have, a venture, and the fact that she's married and his own workings of his brain are keeping him in his sedimentary place. And this comes to a very beautiful climax
Mm-hmm.
and he describes his experience of consciousness. And this is where I think this is almost getting to modernism. Like a lot of this is pretty classical to me. Like we haven't quite gotten to modernism all the
Yeah,
way. But this sentence where I was like, oh, we're getting there. He thought that in her eyes he would ascend to an angelical stature, and as he attached the fervent nature of his companion more and more closely to him, he heard the strange and personal voice which he recognized as his own, insisting on the soul's incurable loneliness. I love that. I love the distance he has from his own connection to his brain, which is analogous to the distance from his own body. Right? Remember, he said that he kind of that depersonalization at the beginning. Oh, I'm sorry. It goes on. We cannot give ourselves, it said. We are our own. It's such a weird sentence because it's like his own brain is telling him what to do, but also that it's just the state of nature.
yeah,
Very conflicting as to what that
I
passage.
yeah, like the way I'm reading that, which could be
Yeah.
wrong, is he's reading it as his okay, he has this ideological notion of the fundamental loneliness of life. And he's got good evidence for that given, just I don't know how his life has turned out. Um but he's actually being provided with real living human affection in
Yeah.
Mrs. Sinico. Um, so I feel it's almost like his real self is actually starting to come out,
Hmm.
and it's like while his ideology is distinct, and like the words he's saying are not resonant with him anymore. Like he's hearing him say these words, but the words are empty because he actually is feeling a personal connection. Wow, just
Well,
like
that,
one
by the way, that's a beautiful interpretation, and I accept it immediately. I think it's great. I love that. That's
okay.
better than that's great.
All right, well that's satisfying. Um, yeah, like I mean, it's like it's really cute, or touching, like the way they're getting closer, just the way, um, and also just background with the wife, referring to Captain Sinico, Mrs. Sinico's husband, was encouraged Mr. Doofy's visits, thinking that his daughter's hand was in question. He had dismissed his wife so sincerely from his gallery of pleasures that he did not suspect that anyone else would take an interest in her, which is just a great like statement of I can't
Yeah.
even imagine somebody wanting her. She's so disconnected from my pleasures. Um,
Ooh,
as the husband was often away and the daughter out giving music lessons, Mr. Dufay, was it?
I think just Duffy.
Duffy had many opportunities of enjoying the ladies' society. Neither he nor she had any such adventures before, and neither was conscious of any incongruity. Little by little he entangled his thoughts with hers. He lent her books, provided her with ideas, shared his intellectual life with her. She listened to all. Like that's touching. I like that. Like just
Yeah.
that way. Often they spent their evenings alone. Little by little, as their thoughts entangled, they spoke of the subjects less remote. Her companionship was like a worm's soil about an exotic. Many times she allowed the dark to fall upon them, refraining from lighting the lamp. The dark, discreet room, their isolation, the music that still vibrated in their ears united them. The union exalted them. I lost my track. Exalted him, wore away the rough edges of his character, emotionalized his mental life. And like that's just great. That's just really touching. Like she is the warm soil about an exotic, and he's the exotic. The exotic
Right.
plant. That's just so endearing. And
Yeah.
it happened there, and very sadly, at the end of these discourses, the end of these discourses was that one night during which she had shown every sign of unusual excitement, Mrs. Sinico caught up his hand passionately and pressed it to her cheek. Mr. Doofy was very much surprised. Her interpretation of his words disillusioned him. He did not visit her for a week, and then he basically just stops, and basically they're breaking up, and it's so sad. when they're breaking up. When they came out of the park, they walked in silence towards the tram, but here she began to tremble so violently that, fearing another collapse on her part, he bade her goodbye quickly and left her. A few days later, he received a parcel containing his books and music. 4 years passed. Like, that's just great. That's
Yeah,
just,
it's great.
you know, just the fact that, like, she's trembling so violently, fearing another. He just walks away. You know, like
Yeah.
he doesn't want this episode. He doesn't deal with that. He doesn't. His heart doesn't open. You
Yeah, and
know.
I think there's a mapping of interplay of desire that's super satisfying in this story. That it's almost like they're two electrons bouncing off each other, and the rejection hits her and bounces into alcohol, and then jumps back and hits him, and
Yeah.
that interplay is very good. I'm speeding it up a tiny bit because I didn't even realize this. Joseph has almost been talking for 2 hours.
Shit. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Let's get to the end. So
It's
basically,
because we have a dud. By the way, I would say 1 minute of that was not talking about the text. We were like really just in the text for 2 hours. It was
yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. So I'll just okay. But I just have. So basically, what happens is like 4 years later, he's just reading the newspaper one evening, and he it's so fucking amazing what happens. I can't stress the perfection of it. Of just, one evening as he was about to put a morsel of corned beef and cabbage into his mouth, his hand stopped. His eyes fixed themselves on a paragraph in the evening paper which he had propped against the water. Wow. He placed the morsel of the food on his plate and read the paragraph attentively. Then he drank a glass of water, pushed his plate to one side, doubled the paper down before him between his elbow, and read the paragraph over and over again. The cabbage began to deposit a cold white grease on his face. The girl came over to him to ask, was his dinner not properly cooked? He said it was very good and ate a few mouthfuls of it with difficulty. Then he paid his bill and went out. He's just reading a paragraph about how Mrs. Sinico fucking died, run over by a train. And he's doing all these like little polite things, all these little exactitudes. I mean, how can you write something so perfect? How can you characterize this impersonal human being so precisely that he would, he'd double over. He's not like fainting. He's not like going where is characterized by the same impersonality, and like then that report that like just that such a dry impersonal way the whole report is presented. I can't, like, that's the way he learns it. Of course, that's the universe in which it's written. Is this soulless kind of bit of reporting. The threadbare phrases, the inane expressions of sympathy, the cautious words of a reporter won over to conceal the details of a commonplace vulgar death attacked his stomach. That's great! But like his moralism is coming through here. Not merely had she degraded herself, she had degraded him. He saw the squalid tract for vice miserable and mellowed, and basically, she's an alcoholic, as we were saying. Like that's
right, yeah.
Like that's the moralism. That's the thing that's like striking him at that moment.
It's like keeping him from the real. I mean, it's what's saving. It's how he dies. That's his symbolic death. Is he just goes back to being this misanthropic, lonely dude who doesn't connect with anyone, right? Like
but then he has that bit of protection, almost like feeling like, oh God, she wrecked herself, and I can't believe I was ever involved with her, this dirty alcoholic. And then the real cuts through all of that. He goes to the park where they broke up and had so many conversations. He sees like a couple standing, like in the moonlight on the side of a hill, and knowing that they want him desperately to leave. No one wants him. His life would be lonely too until he too died, ceased to exist, became a memory, if anyone remembered him.
Yeah.
And just, it hurts so much. It's great.
I love this one.
She seemed to be near him in the darkness. At moments he seemed to feel her voice touch his ear, her hand touch his. He stood still to listen. Why had he withheld life from her? Why had he sentenced her to death? He felt his moral nature falling to pieces. Yeah. It's so perfect. Yeah. How can anything be so perfect?
And he actually died in the way he, it's the different than the, what's the Chekhov story we read where the guy becomes like a landlord and kind of,
Oh, Niche.
he kind of, it's a similar story in that one aspect. But I like how here he has this last confrontation and literally, falls to pieces.
Yeah, it's like he gnawed the rectitude of his life. He felt that he had been outcast from life's feast. One human being had seemed to love him, and he had denied her life and happiness. He sentenced her to ignominy, a death of shame. He knew that the prostrate creatures down by the wall were watching him and wished him gone. No one wanted him. He was an outcast from life's feast. He turned his eyes to the gray, gleaming river winding down towards Dublin. Beyond the river, it just it
Yeah.
passed slowly, the train, but still he heard in his ears the laborious drone of the engine reiterating the syllables of her name. Ah! I mean, just that. It's his fault. He knows it's his fault.
He finally lets it in.
Yeah. And just this final image of lonely. He waited for some minutes listening. He could hear nothing. The night was perfectly silent. He listened again. Perfectly silent. He felt that he was alone.
There you go.
Nothing in life is that good. You even wrote it on there. Just like nothing in life is that good.
Nothing in life is that good. Yeah, I felt that about. Well, it was weird because you texted 3 minutes, or you texted like, and when I said 5 minutes, I was on the last page, and I was like, no, wait. I was like, whoa, okay, hold on. But yeah.
Oh, sorry to interrupt that. But
Oh
yeah.
no, no, it's good. I was almost done. Yeah, so I really enjoyed it. I think Joyce is great. I think we should yeah, I think that's a good stopping point. I think for this one, in honor of the how much we loved it, I don't really think I need to do a what was
Yeah.
traumatizing question. I think it was
What is there to
good.
summarize? What is
Yeah,
there to say? Like,
exactly.
oh, how did this merciless work of art, this supreme achievement, how did this uh, touch us? Like, obviously,
Yeah, I mean, otherwise we wouldn't have spent. I think the proof here is literally just time.
you
We
know,
spent 2 hours talking about it, and we could have gone 2 hours more.
yeah, we really, really, really could have. It was barely
Uh,
40 pages, all of what we read. Um,
yeah. So that's the proof for me is that there's some we read where I was like, yeah, that was great. Yeah. But with this one, it was like, yeah, that's great, but also it demanded investigation. It demanded you look closely, and that's why I think we did the 2 hours on. So thank you for the journey.
yeah, it was fantastic, Chris. God, I feel like myself. Um,
Good. That's what Joyce should do. I mean, well, we're doing more of that. What are we doing the 12th century diary next? Or are we doing no, we're doing Beckett next.
yeah, we're doing Beckett next. Yeah, yeah.
Beckett and then the 12th century diary. Okay, good. Well, we're getting to some of our favorites here. I really like this weird diary. It's more of a memoir, but it's still literature. It counts. It's only 80 pages, so you'll
It'll
be
be great.
fine.
It'll be great. It'll be great.
Uh,
I'm looking forward to it. And I'm looking forward to the Beckett next week. I've just been hankering for some Beckett.
Well,
Um,
I'm an experimental artist, and so it just feels like there's obviously a hole if I haven't read Beckett very much, and I've only read a couple things. So thank you for
yeah,
throwing it
yeah.
in.
And we'll be doing. I mean, we're gonna do a lot of Beckett down the line. We're gonna read the trilogy because that thing is just fantastic.
Sounds
Um,
great.
all right. So all right. So this is great, Chris, and
Yeah.
see you next week.
See you soon.